Your life does not become calmer because the world gets easier. It becomes calmer only when you stop surrendering your mind to what you cannot control. You already know the cost of chaos. This is your chance to answer it with discipline. If you are tired of reacting, doubting yourself, and letting every delay, opinion, and disappointment disturb your peace, stay here. This is a place for people who are ready to examine themselves honestly and live by reason instead of impulse. Subscribe if you want Stoic truth that helps you govern your mind, steady your choices, and meet each day with discipline. In this video, you will face the habits that keep you restless and learn how calm becomes strength when it is built on virtue, control, and clear judgment. Do not listen casually. Hear what is useful, reject what is false, and keep what makes you better today. Number 1. Govern your mind before you chase any success. Success without self-mastery is failure wearing expensive clothes. A restless mind can build a career and still destroy a life. A man can earn praise from strangers while becoming weak in private. He can appear disciplined to the world while being ruled by impulse every hour of the day. He can chase achievement with all his strength and still remain a slave to anger, fear, envy, pleasure, and endless distraction. This is why your first task is not to conquer the world. Your first task is to govern your own mind. Look carefully at your life, not the image you show others, not the excuses you repeat to protect your pride. Look at the truth. How many times has your own mind betrayed you because you never trained it to obey reason? One harsh comment ruins your peace for an entire day. One moment of frustration controls your speech. One small setback fills your thoughts with bitterness. One delay makes you impatient. One rejection makes you question your worth. One temptation pulls you away from your purpose. You do not suffer because life is difficult. You suffer because your mind reacts without discipline. The undisciplined mind cannot carry success without corruption. Give power to a man who cannot govern himself, and his desires will destroy him. Give praise to a man who depends on approval, and he will become terrified of criticism. Give wealth to a man ruled by impulse, and he will waste his life chasing comfort while his character rots. Give attention to a man who has never examined himself, and he will lose himself in vanity. External success only magnifies the condition of the inner life. If the mind is weak, success becomes dangerous. You keep thinking success will finally bring peace to your mind. But the truth is the opposite. Peace must come first. A calm mind sees clearly. A calm mind chooses carefully. A calm mind acts without panic and rests without guilt. Calm is not laziness. Calm is not passivity. Calm is strength under command. Calm is the refusal to hand your reason over to every emotion and event. The person who cannot sit alone with their thoughts without reaching for noise, distraction, or stimulation is not free. The person who constantly reacts to every opinion, every insult, every inconvenience, and every desire does not own themselves. They belong to whatever controls their attention in that moment. If your mood changes every time circumstances change, then your life is being ruled from the outside. Stoicism demands something higher from you. It demands that you become the ruler of your own inner world. You must begin by understanding what is truly under your control. Your thoughts are under your control. Your judgments are under your control. Your choices are under your control. Your actions are under your control. But the opinions of others are not. The outcome of your work is not fully yours. The behavior of people around you is not yours to command. Time itself will not obey your wishes. If you spend your life trying to control what does not belong to you, then anxiety will become your permanent companion. Look at how much energy you waste every day fighting reality. You replay conversations in your head, hoping to change what was already said. You become angry because people fail to behave according to your expectations. You panic over future outcomes that do not yet exist. You exhaust yourself, trying to force certainty from an uncertain world. But the Stoic understands something the emotional mind refuses to accept. Peace begins the moment you stop demanding control over what was never yours. This is why governing your mind matters more than chasing success. A person who governs themselves cannot be easily disturbed. They do not collapse because of delay. They do not lose direction because of criticism. They do not become arrogant because of praise. Their center remains steady because it is rooted in reason rather than emotion. Right now, your greatest enemy is not the difficult person in your life. It is not the lack of opportunity. It is not your past. Your greatest enemy is the untamed voice within you that speaks without examination. The voice that says you must react immediately. The voice that says discomfort should always be avoided. The voice that says your feelings are facts. The voice that demands pleasure before discipline and excuses before responsibility. Most people obey that voice their entire lives. They never stop to question it. They become servants to temporary emotion. Anger tells them to attack, so they attack. Fear tells them to retreat, so they retreat. Desire tells them to indulge, so they indulge. Laziness tells them to wait, so they wait. Then they wonder why their life never becomes stable. They wonder why peace escapes them. They wonder why success feels empty even when they achieve it. The Stoic path begins when you stop obeying every thought that enters your mind. Not every thought deserves trust. Not every emotion deserves action. Your mind must be examined before it is followed. This is the beginning of freedom. When irritation rises inside you, pause before speaking. When fear enters your thoughts, pause before believing it. When desire demands immediate satisfaction, pause before obeying it. In that pause, your freedom lives. A man who cannot pause cannot govern himself. He becomes predictable, weak, and easily controlled by circumstance. You have practiced reaction for years. That is why calm feels difficult. You trained your mind to chase stimulation. You trained it to escape discomfort immediately. You trained it to seek constant distraction from silence. Then you became surprised that peace does not stay with you. The mind becomes whatever you repeatedly teach it to become. If you want calm, you must train for calm deliberately. Begin each morning by sitting in silence before the world enters your mind. Do not reach for your phone immediately. Do not flood your attention with noise before you have examined yourself. Sit still and ask yourself what kind of person you intend to be today. Ask yourself whether you will allow events to control your character. Ask yourself whether you will meet frustration with reason or emotion. Prepare your mind before life tests it. Throughout the day, watch your judgments carefully. Most suffering begins not from events themselves, but from the meaning you attach to them. Someone ignores you, and immediately your mind creates insult. Someone succeeds, and your mind creates envy. A difficulty appears, and your mind calls it unfair. But these judgments are choices even when they feel automatic. You can question them, you can replace them, you can refuse to let them govern your behavior. The disciplined mind says this situation is difficult but not unbearable. The disciplined mind says this criticism may contain truth, so I will examine it calmly. The disciplined mind says this obstacle is an opportunity to practice patience, courage, and self-command. This is not weakness. This is mastery. You say you want success, but are you willing to become the kind of person capable of carrying it wisely? Success without discipline creates arrogance. Success without calm creates anxiety. Success without virtue creates corruption. The Stoic does not chase success as the highest good because success can disappear tomorrow. Reputation can disappear, wealth can disappear, position can disappear, but character remains yours if you protect it. This is why the Stoic measures life differently. The question is not how much have you gained. The question is, who are you becoming while gaining it? Are you becoming calmer or more restless? Are you becoming stronger or more dependent on comfort? Are you becoming more honest with yourself or more skilled at hiding from truth? Many people spend years building a public life while neglecting their private soul. They know how to impress others but not how to govern themselves. They know how to appear confident while being terrified internally. They know how to chase achievement while avoiding silence, because silence forces them to confront what they have become. Do not fear silence. Sit with yourself honestly. Examine your habits carefully. Observe what controls you. Observe what steals your peace repeatedly. Observe the desires that weaken your discipline. Observe the fears that make you betray your own values. Self-examination is painful because it removes illusion. But illusion is the true prison. Every evening, review your day without excuse. Ask yourself where you lost control of your mind. Ask yourself where emotion defeated reason. Ask yourself where you acted against your own principles. Then ask where you showed discipline, patience, honesty, and courage. This is how the Stoic sharpens the soul daily. Not through fantasy, but through ruthless self-observation. You cannot change what you refuse to examine. Most people avoid this because they want comfort more than truth. But comfort has made them weak. They distract themselves endlessly because stillness would force them to face their own disorder. Yet the disorder remains whether they face it or not. Avoidance never heals the mind. It only delays confrontation. Understand this clearly. Calm is not something given to you by perfect conditions. Calm is earned through inner discipline. If your peace depends on everything going your way, then you will never know peace for long. Life will test you constantly. People will disappoint you. Plans will fail. The body will age. Loss will arrive. Praise will turn into criticism. Nothing external remains stable. This is why the Stoic builds stability within. The calm person is not calm because life became easy. They are calm because they stopped expecting life to obey them. They accepted reality without surrendering their virtue. They learned that difficulty is not permission to abandon reason. They learned that pain is not an excuse for destructive behavior. They learned that emotion must answer to judgment rather than command it. Think about how much damage has come from moments you failed to govern yourself. One angry reaction destroys trust. One impulsive decision creates years of regret. One moment of cowardice becomes a habit of avoidance. One uncontrolled desire weakens discipline repeatedly. A person does not ruin their life all at once. They ruin it through unexamined moments repeated daily. This is why Stoicism focuses so intensely on the present moment. Not because the future does not matter, but because your character is built now. Right now you are either strengthening reason or strengthening impulse. Right now you are either training calm or training reactivity. Every moment shapes the person you are becoming. When frustration appears today, do not immediately call it bad. Use it to practice patience. When someone insults you, do not rush to defend your ego. Use it to practice self-command. When discomfort appears, do not flee from it instantly. Use it to strengthen endurance. The Stoic transforms ordinary difficulties into training for the soul. Stop asking whether life feels fair. The universe owes you nothing except the opportunity to respond with virtue. That is enough. Your responsibility is not to control events. Your responsibility is to control your conduct. A calm mind understands this deeply. There will be days when your emotions feel stronger than your discipline. There will be moments when anger rises quickly or fear grips your thoughts. Do not become discouraged by this. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to stop becoming enslaved by emotion. Even progress in self-governance requires patience. The disciplined mind is built through repetition, not sudden transformation. Do not wait for motivation before practicing discipline. Motivation changes with mood. Reason remains. Train yourself to act according to principle, even when emotion resists. Wake up when it is time to wake up. Speak honestly even when lying would feel easier. Stay calm when reacting would feel satisfying. Keep your word when breaking it would bring comfort. This is how character is built. You admire strong people, but strength is not loud. True strength appears in restraint. It appears in the person who remains composed under pressure. It appears in the person who refuses bitterness after disappointment. It appears in the person who continues acting with integrity even when nobody watches. That is the strength Stoicism demands from you. The world trains people to chase appearance before substance. It teaches them to seek attention before wisdom. It rewards speed over reflection and stimulation over clarity. But the Stoic refuses to surrender to this disorder. The Stoic understands that a distracted mind cannot live wisely. Attention must be protected carefully because wherever attention goes, character follows. Guard your attention from useless anger, useless comparison, and useless noise. Stop feeding your mind endless distraction and then wondering why peace escapes you. Your inner life becomes shaped by what you repeatedly consume. If you fill your mind with chaos, then chaos will speak through you. If you train your mind toward reason, calm, and discipline, then your actions will begin to reflect those qualities naturally. Success achieved without self-governance creates fragile people. They become dependent on status and terrified of loss. But the person who has learned to govern their own mind carries peace into every condition. They remain steady whether they succeed or fail because they understand that virtue matters more than outcome. This does not mean abandoning ambition. It means purifying ambition. Work hard, pursue excellence, fulfill your responsibilities fully, but do not tie your worth to results outside your control. Your value comes from how you think, how you choose, and how you act. Nothing external can improve or corrupt your character without your permission. Right now, you may feel tired of your own patterns, tired of reacting emotionally, tired of wasting time, tired of surrendering your peace to every event and every opinion. Good. That discomfort is useful if it pushes you toward examination instead of avoidance. You still have time to become different. But time is leaving, whether you use it wisely or not. Every day your habits become more deeply rooted. Every excuse strengthens weakness. Every act of discipline strengthens freedom. You are shaping your future self constantly through what you repeatedly tolerate today. So begin now. Not tomorrow when conditions improve, not when motivation appears. Govern your mind today. Watch your judgments. Restrain useless reactions. Accept what you cannot control. Practice calm deliberately. Examine yourself honestly each evening. Return to reason each morning. Build a mind that does not collapse under pressure. One day your life will end. Your achievements will fade from memory. Your possessions will belong to others. The praise of strangers will disappear completely. But the condition of your character will have determined the quality of every day you lived. This is why governing your mind matters more than chasing success. A calm, disciplined soul cannot be easily conquered by the world. The person who governs themselves has already won the most important battle. Number 2. Accept only what lies within your control today. Stop letting your mind suffer over things it was never given power to change. You wake up each day and immediately step into mental chaos you did not question. You replay yesterday's conversations. You anticipate outcomes you cannot see. You argue with people who are not even present, and you call this thinking. But most of what you call thinking is nothing more than uncontrolled reaction. It is the mind moving without judgment, without discipline, without truth. And every moment you allow it, you drift further away from inner stability. You are not disturbed by life itself. You are disturbed by your interpretation of life. Two people can face the same event and live entirely different inner realities. One remains steady while the other collapses into frustration. The difference is never the event. The difference is what each mind claims as its own responsibility. You keep trying to control what belongs outside of you while neglecting what belongs entirely within you. This confusion is the root of your suffering. Look closely at your daily thoughts. You attach importance to outcomes you cannot guarantee. You depend on approval from people who are not responsible for your peace. You treat delay as injustice and resistance as personal attack. You turn uncertainty into fear and opinion into identity. Each of these reactions feels automatic, but none of them are necessary. They are choices made so quickly you do not notice them being made. The truth is simple but demanding. Only your judgment belongs fully to you. Only your intention belongs fully to you. Only your choice in this present moment belongs fully to you. Everything else stands outside your control. Your body can be affected by illness, but your response to it remains yours. Your work can be interrupted, but your attitude toward it remains yours. People can speak, but your acceptance or rejection of their words remains yours. If you misplace this boundary, your life becomes unstable no matter how much you achieve. Most suffering begins when you claim ownership over what you do not control. You believe you control outcomes, so you suffer when they fail. You believe you control others, so you suffer when they act freely. You believe you control the future, so you suffer when it remains uncertain. This constant expansion of control beyond its natural limit creates endless frustration. It is like trying to command the weather and becoming angry when the sky refuses to obey. You have practiced this misplacement for so long that it feels like part of your identity. You worry not because worry is useful, but because you have trained your mind to treat uncertainty as danger. You become angry not because anger solves anything, but because you have trained your mind to resist reality when it does not align with expectation. You feel disappointment not because reality has failed you, but because your expectations were built on illusion of control. If you want peace, you must begin by correcting this error at its root. The Stoic path does not begin with changing the world. It begins with correcting judgment. Every situation must pass through a single question before you respond. Is this within my control or outside it? If it is within your control, then your duty is clear. Act with reason. If it is outside your control, then your duty is also clear. Release it without resistance. But this release is not passive resignation. It is disciplined clarity. You are not abandoning responsibility. You are assigning responsibility correctly. You do not waste strength trying to command outcomes that do not belong to you. Instead, you focus your strength on the only domain where your power is absolute: your mind, your intention, your choice. Begin your day with this distinction before anything else enters your attention. Before you engage with messages, obligations, or external demands, examine your own inner state. Ask yourself what judgments you are bringing into the day. Are you assuming outcomes that are not yet real? Are you carrying frustration from events already completed? Are you assigning meaning to things before examining whether that meaning is rational? This early examination prevents unnecessary suffering from forming later in the day. As the day unfolds, practice interruption of automatic judgment. When something happens that normally disturbs you, do not immediately accept your first interpretation. Pause within the moment. Separate the event from the story your mind is building around it. What happened is one thing. What you think it means is another. Only one of these belongs to reality. The other belongs to your interpretation. A delay in your plans is not an attack on your life unless you decide it is. A criticism is not a wound unless you choose to treat it as one. A missed opportunity is not a tragedy unless you attach your identity to it. The mind constantly converts neutral events into emotional experiences through unchecked judgment. This is where discipline must enter. Train yourself to ask, what part of this situation is mine to govern? If you face rejection, your control lies in your response, not in forcing acceptance. If you face failure, your control lies in correction and effort, not in rewriting the past. If you face conflict, your control lies in speech and reason, not in controlling another person's behavior. Once you clearly identify your sphere of control, everything outside it becomes lighter to carry because you are no longer pretending it belongs to you. There is a quiet strength that develops when you stop fighting what is beyond your reach. It is not indifference, it is precision. Your energy is no longer scattered across endless external concerns. It is directed inward where transformation is actually possible. The more you practice this, the less reactive you become. The less reactive you become, the more stable your life feels even when circumstances remain unpredictable. You will notice something important as you practice this discipline. Many of your emotional reactions are delayed judgments, not immediate truths. You feel upset, then you justify it with reasoning after the fact. You feel anxious, then your mind constructs explanations for why it is justified. You feel anger, then you search for evidence to support it. In reality, the emotion arrived first and the reasoning followed to defend it. This reversal must be corrected if you want clarity. Before accepting any judgment, slow it down. Do not let emotion finalize interpretation instantly. Ask whether this thought is accurate or simply familiar. Ask whether reacting to it improves your character or weakens it. Ask whether you are responding as a rational being or as a conditioned impulse. This questioning interrupts automatic belief in every mental impression. The mind that is never examined becomes a tyrant. It speaks loudly, and you obey silently. It creates fear, and you act as though fear is fact. It produces desire, and you treat desire as command. It produces anger, and you behave as though anger is justified authority. But none of these inner movements deserve unquestioned rule. They are signals to be evaluated, not orders to be followed. A disciplined mind does not suppress emotion. It observes it. It does not reject experience. It evaluates it. It does not pretend control over the uncontrollable. It redirects attention toward what is governed by reason. This is how freedom is built internally, not through external change but through internal correction of attention. You may notice resistance when you begin this practice. The mind will attempt to pull you back into old habits of reaction. It will tell you that immediate judgment is necessary. It will tell you that letting go of control means losing safety. It will try to convince you that emotional intensity equals truth. Do not argue with it. Observe it. Continue applying the distinction between what is yours and what is not. Over time, something shifts. You stop feeling dragged by every external event. You stop building emotional collapse around temporary difficulty. You begin to respond rather than react. You begin to choose rather than obey impulse. You begin to live from reason rather than noise. This is not a change in circumstance, it is a change in governance. When you look back at your past suffering, you will notice how much of it came from resisting reality instead of understanding it. You were not harmed by events as much as by refusal to accept them as they were. Acceptance here does not mean approval, it means clarity. It means seeing things as they are without adding unnecessary interpretation that distorts your response. There is strength in accepting what cannot be changed because it frees your attention for what can be shaped. Every moment spent fighting the unchangeable is a moment stolen from your own development. Every complaint about what lies outside your control is a withdrawal from your own peace. Every attachment to outcome is a weakening of your present action. The person who understands this becomes difficult to disturb, not because life stops being difficult, but because their mind stops multiplying difficulty unnecessarily. They carry clarity into uncertainty. They carry reason into emotion. They carry discipline into chaos. Their life becomes steadier not because the world becomes predictable, but because their mind stops pretending it must control the unpredictable. So begin again today with a simpler way of living. Before reacting, identify control. Before judging, examine thought. Before worrying, separate what is yours from what is not. Before complaining, redirect attention to your own action. This is not theory, it is daily discipline. It is practiced in ordinary moments when no one is watching and nothing dramatic is happening. The quality of your life will not be determined by how much you control outside yourself. It will be determined by how consistently you refuse to mistake external events for internal command. Once this is understood deeply, your mind becomes quieter not because life is quieter, but because you have stopped arguing with reality. There is nothing more urgent than learning this distinction, because every day you delay it, you reinforce unnecessary suffering, and every day you apply it, you reclaim a piece of your peace. The choice is always present. What belongs to you, what does not, and how you respond in this moment defines the only control you truly possess. Number 3. Train calm thoughts to guide every hard decision. The moment you face a difficult decision, your mind reveals its true level of discipline, not your words, not your intentions, not your public image, but the quality of your thinking when pressure arrives. In those moments, your mind either becomes a steady guide or a chaotic voice pulling you in every direction at once. Most people never notice this difference because they assume their thoughts are automatically trustworthy. They are not. Thoughts are only impressions until reason examines them. When you stand before a hard decision, your mind does not remain neutral. It floods you with fear of loss, desire for gain, memory of past failure, anticipation of future approval, and pressure from imagined outcomes that do not yet exist. All of this arrives instantly and tries to present itself as truth, but none of it is truth. It is reaction. And reaction is not a reliable guide for action. If you follow unexamined thoughts during difficulty, you will always choose based on pressure instead of clarity. You will choose what feels urgent instead of what is right. You will choose what reduces discomfort in the moment instead of what strengthens character over time. This is how lives become unstable without any single catastrophic mistake. It is built through repeated decisions made without calm judgment. Calm is not something that appears naturally when life becomes difficult. Calm is something trained before difficulty arrives so that it can be used during it. A mind that has not practiced calm in ordinary moments will collapse under pressure. A mind that has trained calm as a discipline will have access to clarity even when emotion rises. When a hard decision appears, your first responsibility is not to act. Your first responsibility is to slow the mind, not to suppress it, not to ignore it, but to observe it clearly enough that reason can take its proper place. Most mistakes are not made because people lack intelligence. They are made because they act before intelligence is given space to speak. The undisciplined mind believes urgency is wisdom. It believes the fastest thought is the truest thought. It believes emotional intensity is a sign of importance. This is why it rushes into choices it later regrets. Calm thinking breaks this pattern by refusing to treat urgency as authority. Calm thinking delays reaction long enough for judgment to become accurate. When facing a decision, begin by separating what is happening from what you are imagining about it. The situation itself is often simple, but the mind wraps it in layers of fear and expectation. A choice between speaking honestly or remaining silent becomes a fear of rejection. A choice between continuing effort or stopping becomes fear of failure. A choice between discipline or indulgence becomes fear of discomfort. The decision is never as large as the emotional narrative surrounding it. Train yourself to strip that narrative away. Ask what is actually present in this moment without projecting outcomes that have not occurred. Most suffering in decision-making comes from trying to solve future uncertainty with present emotion. That approach cannot work. Emotion reacts to imagined outcomes while reason responds to present facts. Calm thinking begins when you stop treating emotion as instruction. Emotion is information about your current state, not a command for your action. Fear shows you where attachment exists. Desire shows you where dependence has formed. Anger shows you where expectations were violated. But none of these are sufficient reasons to act. They are signals that require examination, not obedience. In every difficult decision, there is a point where you must decide whether to obey immediate impulse or pause for judgment. That pause is where discipline is built. It may feel uncomfortable because the mind is used to instant reaction, but that discomfort is the beginning of strength. A mind that can pause is a mind that can govern itself. During that pause, ask a single clear question. What action aligns with reason rather than reaction? This question cuts through emotional distortion. It forces attention away from fear and toward clarity. It replaces urgency with evaluation. It brings you back to your role as the one who chooses rather than the one who reacts. Many of your past regrets came from decisions made without this pause. You spoke too quickly in moments of anger. You committed too quickly in moments of excitement. You withdrew too quickly in moments of fear. Each of these decisions felt justified at the time because emotion was leading. But emotion does not see consequences. It only sees immediate relief or immediate gain. If you study your own life honestly, you will see that confusion, not lack of opportunity, has caused much of your suffering. Confusion arises when emotion and reason are not separated. Calm thinking resolves confusion by giving reason authority over interpretation. Without that authority, you are left reacting to every internal impulse as if it is guidance. You must also understand that calm does not mean absence of feeling. It means presence of structure. You will still feel pressure during decisions. You will still feel fear of loss. You will still feel desire for gain. But calm allows you to hold those feelings without surrendering control of action to them. This distinction is what separates a reactive life from a disciplined one. Before making any significant decision, train yourself to observe the full range of your internal reactions without immediately identifying with them. Notice fear without becoming fear. Notice desire without becoming desire. Notice doubt without becoming doubt. This creates space between what arises in you and what you choose to do about it. In that space lies rational freedom. Most people collapse that space instantly. They feel something and then become it. Once they become it, they act from it. This is why their decisions feel unpredictable even to themselves. Calm thinking expands that space so that choice becomes intentional rather than automatic. You will also notice that calm thinking exposes false urgency. Many decisions feel life-defining in the moment but reveal themselves to be minor when viewed with distance. The mind inflates importance when it is under pressure. Calm reduces that inflation by restoring proportion. What seemed overwhelming becomes manageable when seen clearly. What seemed permanent becomes temporary when viewed rationally. Train yourself daily in small decisions so that calm becomes familiar. When choosing how to respond to minor frustration, do not rush. When deciding how to spend your time, do not default to habit. When choosing words in conversation, do not speak before thought. These small practices are the foundation of calm judgment in larger decisions. You do not suddenly become rational under pressure. You become rational through repetition in ordinary moments. Each morning you should prepare your mind for this discipline. Before the day begins, reflect on the fact that you will face decisions today that may trigger emotion. Decide in advance that reason will guide you instead of reaction. This pre-decision reduces the power of surprise. When difficulty arrives, you are not starting from confusion. You are continuing from preparation. Throughout the day, return to this preparation whenever you notice mental disturbance, not by forcing calm, but by re-establishing perspective. Ask again what is within your control in this decision and what is not. Bring attention back to the present facts instead of imagined futures. This repeated return is what strengthens the mind. You will still make imperfect decisions at times. Calm thinking does not guarantee flawless outcomes. It guarantees disciplined effort. The outcome of events is never fully yours, but the quality of your reasoning always is. A calm mind accepts responsibility for judgment while releasing attachment to results. This is where true stability begins, not in controlling outcomes, but in refining thought. Not in eliminating difficulty, but in responding to it with clarity. Not in avoiding pressure, but in meeting it with reason. Over time, you will recognize a change in yourself. Decisions that once felt overwhelming will feel structured. Emotional noise will still appear, but it will no longer dominate your action. You will begin to act with consistency even in uncertain conditions. This is not because life becomes easier, but because your thinking becomes clearer. The goal is not to eliminate emotion from your decisions. The goal is to ensure emotion never replaces reason. Calm thought must remain the guide even when emotion is present. This requires constant vigilance over your own mind, not judgment of others, not control of events, only disciplined observation of your internal state. When you reach a moment of decision today, remember that you are not choosing between easy and difficult paths. You are choosing between reaction and reason. One leads to instability regardless of outcome. The other leads to clarity regardless of outcome. Only one of these preserves your inner order. So train your mind now, not later. Practice calm in small choices so it becomes available in large ones. Observe emotion without obeying it. Pause before action. Return to reason before commitment. This is how a disciplined life is built. One decision at a time, governed not by impulse but by clarity that has been trained and earned through practice. Number 4. Examine each fear and refuse its false authority. Fear is not a warning from reality. It is a judgment your mind produces before reality has even spoken. You feel it rise inside you, and you treat it as truth, as if the feeling itself has authority over your choices. But fear has never seen the full outcome of anything. It only projects fragments, guesses, and imagined consequences, then demands obedience as if it were wisdom. If you continue to accept fear without examination, you will live a life designed not by reason, but by avoidance. You have already seen this pattern in your own experience. How many decisions were shaped not by what is right, but by what felt safer in the moment? How many opportunities were delayed because fear suggested possible failure? How many conversations were avoided because fear predicted rejection? How many actions were never taken because fear presented imaginary suffering as certainty? None of these fears were actual events. They were mental constructions treated as authority. When you do not examine fear, you surrender control of your life to an unverified voice inside your own mind. That voice does not seek truth. It seeks protection, and protection without reason becomes limitation. It shrinks your decisions until your life becomes smaller than your capacity. You begin to avoid discomfort so consistently that avoidance feels like identity. Yet what you call caution is often just fear unchallenged. Fear gains power only when it is not questioned. The moment you examine it directly, its structure weakens. Ask yourself what fear is actually demanding of you. Not in vague emotional terms, but in clear reality. What is it predicting? What is it assuming? What evidence does it truly hold beyond imagination? When you slow it down and expose it to reason, fear loses the certainty it tries to project. Most fear is built from incomplete thought. The mind jumps from possibility to conclusion without passing through logic. Something might go wrong becomes something will go wrong. I might fail becomes I am likely to fail. I might be judged becomes I will be rejected. These transformations happen silently and quickly, and because they are not questioned, they begin to feel real. But speed does not create truth. Only examination does. You must learn to separate what is happening from what fear is saying about what might happen. The present moment is almost always manageable. It is the imagined future that creates pressure. Fear rarely lives in reality. It lives in projection. When you bring attention back to what is actually in front of you, fear loses much of its weight. The disciplined mind does not obey fear automatically. It observes it as an impression and then subjects it to judgment. This is where your responsibility begins, not in eliminating fear, but in refusing to let it dictate action without evaluation. Fear can exist, but it must not command. You will notice that fear often disguises itself as prudence. It claims to be protecting you from harm, but in many cases it is protecting you from discomfort, uncertainty, or effort. It tells you not to speak when silence would avoid embarrassment. It tells you not to act when action might expose you to failure. It tells you not to change when change would require discipline. This is not protection. It is limitation disguised as caution. If you want to reclaim authority over your life, you must challenge fear every time it presents itself as guidance. Ask whether avoiding this action strengthens your character or weakens it. Ask whether the consequence you fear is actually unbearable or simply uncomfortable. Ask whether the cost of inaction is greater than the risk of action. These questions expose fear for what it is when it is not grounded in reason. Fear often survives because it is never fully confronted. It is allowed to remain vague. Vague fear feels powerful because it cannot be tested, but when you define it clearly, it becomes smaller. If you fear failure, define what failure actually means. If you fear rejection, define what rejection actually changes in your control. If you fear uncertainty, acknowledge that uncertainty is the natural condition of every action you take. Clarity weakens fear because it removes imagination from its foundation. The human mind tends to overestimate threat and underestimate resilience. You assume that if something goes wrong, you will not be able to handle it. Yet you have already handled every difficulty that has reached you so far. The mind forgets this and builds a narrative of fragility that is not supported by lived experience. Fear depends on this forgetfulness. Reason depends on memory of capability. Every time you act despite fear, you weaken its authority. Every time you obey fear without examination, you strengthen its influence. This is not abstract philosophy. It is a training process for the mind. You are either reinforcing courage or reinforcing avoidance with each decision you make. There is no neutral ground in this practice. Begin each day by acknowledging that fear will appear in some form. Do not pretend otherwise. Instead, prepare your mind to meet it with examination. Decide in advance that fear will not be treated as instruction. It will be treated as data. When it arises, you will pause, observe, and question before responding. This simple commitment changes the structure of your inner life over time. When fear arises during the day, do not argue with it emotionally. Do not suppress it. Do not obey it immediately. Instead, bring attention to the present facts of the situation, what is actually happening right now that requires action. Separate that from what fear is predicting about what might happen later. This separation is essential. Most suffering comes from confusing present reality with imagined outcomes. You must also learn to recognize how fear distorts perception of risk. It magnifies worst-case scenarios while ignoring neutral or positive possibilities. It presents a narrow version of the future designed to keep you still. But life does not operate in a single outcome. There are always multiple possibilities, many of which fear refuses to acknowledge. Reason restores balance by considering all outcomes, rather than only the most threatening one. There will be moments when fear feels intense enough to demand immediate action. In those moments, your discipline is measured most clearly. The practice is not to eliminate the feeling, but to refuse instant obedience. Create space between impulse and decision. In that space, reason has room to evaluate. Without that space, fear becomes action by default. You may notice that fear often targets areas where growth is possible. It appears most strongly when you are close to change, responsibility, or unfamiliar territory. This is because fear is designed to preserve the current state, not to guide you toward improvement. Growth requires movement beyond comfort, and fear interprets that movement as threat. If you obey it blindly, you will remain confined to what is already familiar. Examine your fears honestly, and you will see that many of them are repetitions rather than new insights. The same patterns of worry return again and again in different situations. This repetition reveals that fear is not responding to reality, but to habit. It is a learned reaction, not a reliable advisor. What is learned can be unlearned through disciplined attention. The goal is not to become someone who feels no fear. The goal is to become someone who is no longer governed by it. Fear may still arise, but it no longer determines your actions. You observe it, you question it, and then you choose based on reason rather than impulse. This is the essence of inner authority. A life ruled by unexamined fear becomes a life of shrinking potential. Decisions become increasingly conservative, not because wisdom demands it, but because fear narrows the field of choice. Over time, this creates regret not from what was done, but from what was never attempted. The cost of unchallenged fear is always unseen opportunities. To move beyond this, you must treat fear as something to be investigated rather than obeyed. Each time it appears, you ask what it is protecting, what it is exaggerating, and what it is ignoring. You bring it into the light of reason, where its structure becomes visible. Once visible, it loses much of its influence. In daily life, this practice becomes simple but demanding. You will face small moments where fear suggests hesitation. You will feel the impulse to withdraw, delay, or avoid. In those moments, you pause and apply examination, not after the fact, but before action. That pause is where discipline lives. Over time, you will notice that fear still visits, but it no longer decides for you. You begin to act with clarity, even in its presence. You begin to choose based on reasoned judgment, rather than imagined danger. You begin to live with a steadier mind because you are no longer outsourcing authority to internal emotion. There is a quiet strength that emerges when fear is no longer treated as master. It does not remove difficulty from life, but it removes unnecessary suffering from the mind. You still face challenges, but you no longer multiply them through imagination. You respond to what is real instead of what is feared. This is the discipline required of you, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to grant it false authority. Examine it each time it arises. Strip it of exaggeration. Return to what is within your control. Choose action based on reason, not reaction based on imagination. In doing so, you reclaim the governance of your own mind. Number 5. Silence impulsive desires before they corrupt your judgment. Desire does not arrive in your mind as a request. It arrives as a command. It speaks quickly, loudly, and with the illusion of necessity. In that moment, you do not feel choice. You feel pressure. You do not feel reflection. You feel urgency. And if you fail to recognize this distinction, you will live as a servant to impulses that vanish as quickly as they appear, yet leave lasting consequences behind them. You have already seen how impulsive desire shapes your days. A sudden urge to escape discomfort leads you away from responsibility. A craving for immediate pleasure pulls you away from discipline. A desire for approval alters your words in conversation. A wish for relief overrides long-term judgment. Each impulse feels justified while it is active, but afterward it often reveals itself as distortion rather than wisdom. The issue is not that desire exists. The issue is that it is allowed to speak first, and reason is invited only afterward, if at all. When desire is not examined, it becomes a hidden ruler of your life. It selects your actions before you are aware of selecting anything. It decides what you avoid, what you chase, what you postpone, and what you justify. Over time, your life begins to reflect not your values but your impulses repeated without resistance. You may still believe you are choosing freely, yet your choices are increasingly shaped by whatever desire happens to be strongest in the moment. Most people never question desire because it feels identical to identity. If you want something strongly, you assume it must be important. If something feels pleasurable, you assume it must be good. If something relieves discomfort, you assume it must be right. This confusion between intensity and truth is one of the most common sources of self-deception. Impulse does not measure value, it measures immediacy. You must learn to see desire as a movement in the mind, not a command for action. It rises, it grows, it fades. That is its nature. It is not stable enough to govern decisions that shape your life. If you allow something so temporary to determine something so permanent, you will repeatedly act against your own long-term judgment. The disciplined mind does not suppress desire through force. It interrupts it through examination. When desire appears, it is not immediately obeyed or rejected. It is observed, it is questioned, it is held in awareness long enough for reason to evaluate it. In that pause, impulse loses its automatic authority. Without that pause, desire becomes action without permission. You will notice that impulsive desire often disguises itself as urgency. It tells you that action must happen now or the opportunity will be lost. It compresses time to remove reflection. It tries to convince you that hesitation is failure. But urgency without clarity is not wisdom, it is pressure. And pressure is not a guide for rational choice. Begin to recognize the pattern in your own experience. Many decisions made under strong desire feel correct in the moment and unstable afterward. This is because desire does not evaluate consequences, it evaluates sensation. It asks what feels good now, not what produces stability later. If you continue to trust it without examination, you will repeatedly trade long-term order for short-term relief. You do not need to eliminate desire from your mind. That is neither possible nor necessary. What must change is its authority. Desire must no longer lead. It must be placed under reason. Reason observes desire, evaluates it, and determines whether action is justified. This hierarchy must be restored if you want inner stability. To begin this practice, you must first slow the moment in which desire appears. Most impulsive behavior happens because there is no space between feeling and action. That space must be intentionally created. When desire rises, do not act immediately. Stay with it long enough to see its structure. Ask what it is asking you to do. Ask what outcome it promises. Ask what cost it ignores. You will often discover that desire speaks only of gain and never of consequence. It highlights reward while hiding cost. It presents pleasure while ignoring regret. It offers escape while concealing dependency. When examined closely, its argument becomes incomplete. And what is incomplete cannot be trusted as final instruction. The mind that is governed by desire becomes unstable because it is constantly shifting direction. What is wanted in one moment is replaced by something different in the next. This creates inconsistency in action and confusion in identity. You begin many things but complete few. You commit in one state of mind and regret it in another. You feel divided because no single principle is governing your choices. A disciplined life requires that action be anchored in something more stable than desire. That anchor is reasoned judgment. Reason does not depend on mood. It does not change with intensity. It evaluates based on principles that remain consistent across time. When you align your actions with reason rather than impulse, your life begins to stabilize internally even if external conditions remain uncertain. There is a specific form of suffering that comes from obeying every desire. It is not immediate suffering, it is delayed. It appears as regret, inconsistency, weakened discipline, and loss of trust in your own judgment. Each time you follow impulse without examination, you make it easier to do so again. Each repetition strengthens the habit of reaction over reflection. You may notice that impulsive desire often becomes strongest when you are uncomfortable. Discomfort acts as a trigger that pushes the mind toward immediate relief. This is where discipline is tested most clearly. The question is not whether desire appears, it will. The question is whether discomfort will be allowed to dictate action. If every discomfort must be escaped instantly, then you will never develop endurance or clarity. Train yourself to remain present with discomfort without converting it into immediate action. This does not mean ignoring your needs. It means refusing to let discomfort automatically determine your decisions. Many forms of discomfort are temporary signals, not commands. They pass if not immediately obeyed. But if they are always obeyed, they become rulers of behavior. Each morning, before engaging with the demands of the day, set a clear intention regarding desire. Acknowledge that impulses will arise throughout the day. Decide in advance that none of them will be accepted without examination. This preparation reduces the power of surprise. When desire appears, you are not unprepared. You are already committed to evaluating it rather than obeying it. During the day, when desire emerges, bring attention back to reason. Do not argue with it emotionally. Do not justify it automatically. Simply pause and ask whether acting on it strengthens your character or weakens it. This question exposes whether the impulse aligns with long-term discipline or short-term relief. You will find that many desires lose urgency when they are not immediately acted upon. The mind creates intensity through anticipation. When anticipation is interrupted by delay, intensity decreases. This reveals an important truth. Much of what feels urgent is not essential. It is temporary amplification created by unchecked attention. As you practice this consistently, something begins to shift internally. You start to notice a gap between desire and action where choice becomes possible. In that gap, you regain authority over yourself. You are no longer automatically carried by impulse. You are choosing deliberately based on reasoned evaluation. This does not remove pleasure from your life. It removes dependence on it. You are still capable of enjoyment, but enjoyment is no longer the driver of your decisions. It becomes something that follows disciplined action rather than something that dictates it. This distinction restores balance between living and reacting. You will also begin to see how many past regrets were not caused by lack of knowledge, but by refusal to pause. You knew in many situations what was reasonable, but desire spoke more loudly in the moment, and you obeyed it. That pattern can be broken only through consistent interruption of impulse before action. A mind ruled by desire is never satisfied because it constantly shifts focus. Even when it obtains what it wants, it quickly moves to the next demand. This creates a cycle of pursuit without stability. Calm arises only when desire is placed under governance and no longer allowed to define direction. When you practice silence before action, you are not rejecting life, you are reclaiming authorship of it. You are refusing to let temporary impulses shape permanent consequences. You are choosing to let reason guide behavior, rather than allowing sensation to decide it. Over time, this discipline builds trust in yourself. You begin to rely on your own judgment because it is no longer fragmented by impulse. Your actions become more consistent, your decisions become more stable, your mind becomes less reactive and more deliberate. This is not suppression of life, but refinement of it. The true strength of character is not measured by how strongly you feel desire, but by how completely you can prevent it from governing your actions without examination. Each moment of restraint is not denial, but alignment with reason. Each moment of pause is not hesitation, but clarity. Each refusal to obey impulse is a step toward inner governance. If you apply this discipline today, you will begin to see desire for what it is, not a master, not a command, not a truth, but a passing movement in the mind that must answer to reason before it becomes action. Number 6. Choose virtue over comfort in every daily task. You already know how often your life is decided not by wisdom, but by comfort. Not by reason, but by what feels easiest in the moment. Not by what strengthens your character, but by what reduces effort, pressure, or discomfort. This quiet preference for ease over integrity is not harmless. It is the slow erosion of your ability to trust yourself. Every day presents small decisions where virtue and comfort stand on opposite sides. You choose whether to speak truthfully or soften your words to avoid tension. You choose whether to complete a task with discipline or delay it to avoid strain. You choose whether to act with fairness or bend slightly toward convenience. None of these moments feel dramatic, but together they form the structure of your life, and that structure reveals whether you are governed by principle or by ease. Comfort is not your enemy, but obedience to comfort without examination is. When comfort becomes your automatic guide, your actions stop reflecting your values and start reflecting your avoidance of discomfort. You begin to protect yourself from effort, from confrontation, from responsibility, and from discipline. Over time, this protection becomes limitation. You are not harmed by external events as much as you are shaped by your repeated refusal to meet difficulty directly. You may tell yourself that small compromises do not matter, that skipping effort today will not change anything, that avoiding discomfort in one moment is harmless. But character is not built in single moments. It is built through repetition. Every time you choose comfort over virtue, you reinforce a pattern, and every reinforced pattern becomes easier to repeat. Eventually, what began as a choice becomes a default response. Virtue does not demand grand gestures. It demands consistent alignment between action and reason in ordinary tasks. It is how you speak when you are tired. It is how you work when no one is watching. It is how you respond when inconvenience appears. It is how you behave when you could easily justify a lesser standard. Virtue is not separate from daily life. It is daily life lived correctly. Most people believe they will act with integrity when something important happens, but they fail to notice that integrity is trained in unimportant moments. If you cannot act with discipline in small matters, you will not suddenly gain it in large ones. The mind that yields to comfort in minor situations becomes conditioned to yield in major ones. There is no sudden transformation without prior practice. When you choose comfort repeatedly, you are not choosing rest. You are choosing weakness disguised as rest. Real rest restores the body after effort. False comfort avoids effort entirely. One strengthens you for future action. The other weakens your capacity for action. If you confuse the two, your life becomes increasingly fragile even if it appears relaxed. The disciplined life begins when you stop asking what is easiest and start asking what is right. This question must be applied to every task, no matter how small. When you wake up and delay action because comfort feels appealing, you are training avoidance. When you complete tasks despite resistance, you are training strength. Every day you are training something. The only question is what you are reinforcing. You must begin to observe how quickly your mind justifies comfort. It does not say, "I am avoiding discipline." It says, "I need rest." It says, "I will do it later when conditions are better." It says, "This is not the right moment." These justifications feel reasonable because they are spoken by your own mind, but familiarity does not equal truth. Many of your strongest habits are built on repeated justification rather than honest evaluation. The Stoic approach requires interruption of this pattern. When comfort presents itself as the easier path, you do not immediately accept it or reject it. You pause and examine the cost of avoidance. What will be weakened if you choose comfort again? What responsibility will remain unfinished? What standard will be lowered? This examination brings clarity back into a situation that comfort tries to simplify. You must also recognize that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. Often it is a sign that something is necessary. Growth, discipline, and correction rarely feel comfortable in the moment they are required. The mind that avoids discomfort avoids growth. The mind that accepts discomfort in service of reason builds strength over time. Each morning you should prepare for this tension between comfort and virtue. Not by hoping it will not appear, but by expecting it. Decide in advance that when comfort and reason conflict, reason will decide. This preparation removes hesitation when the moment arrives. Without preparation, comfort wins by default. With preparation, choice becomes intentional. Throughout the day, notice how often comfort tries to influence even small decisions. The desire to postpone effort, the desire to avoid difficult conversations, the desire to choose easier actions over correct ones. These are not isolated incidents. They are continuous opportunities to either strengthen or weaken your character. You may notice resistance when you choose virtue over comfort. That resistance is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are breaking habit. The mind resists change because it prefers familiarity. But familiarity is not always aligned with improvement. Often it is simply repetition of past weakness. Virtue requires clarity about what is within your control. You cannot control whether effort feels comfortable. You can control whether you act in accordance with reason despite discomfort. You cannot control how others respond to your discipline. You can control whether your discipline remains steady regardless of response. You cannot control the difficulty of tasks. You can control your commitment to completing them properly. When you align your actions with virtue instead of comfort, something begins to stabilize within you. You stop being ruled by shifting preferences. You begin to act from principle rather than impulse. This creates consistency in behavior even when conditions change. That consistency is the foundation of inner reliability. Without this foundation, your life becomes reactive. You act differently depending on mood, energy, or convenience. On difficult days, you do less. On easy days, you do more. Your behavior becomes inconsistent because it is guided by comfort rather than principle. This inconsistency creates internal tension because you cannot trust your own direction. Virtue removes that tension by creating a single standard for action. The question is no longer how do I feel about this task. The question becomes what does reason require of me in this moment? Once that question is established, emotion loses its authority over decision-making. It may still exist, but it no longer governs action. There will be many moments where choosing virtue feels unnecessary or excessive. You may think no one will notice if you choose comfort instead, but the most important witness to your actions is not others, it is your own mind. Every time you act against your own standard, you weaken trust in yourself, and without self-trust, discipline becomes fragile. To strengthen this trust, you must begin treating small tasks with the same seriousness as large ones. The way you handle minor discomfort reflects your capacity for major responsibility. If you cannot act with integrity in simple matters, you cannot rely on yourself in complex ones. Virtue is not situational. It is consistent, or it is not virtue at all. As you continue this practice, you will begin to notice a change in how you experience discomfort. It will no longer automatically signal avoidance. Instead, it will become a signal for evaluation. You will pause and ask whether enduring this discomfort serves a rational purpose. If it does, you proceed. If it does not, you adjust. But comfort alone is no longer the deciding factor. Over time, the habit of choosing virtue reshapes your inner life. You become less reactive to ease and more committed to principle. You begin to experience a form of stability that does not depend on external conditions. This stability comes from knowing that your actions are aligned with reason regardless of difficulty. This alignment is what creates genuine strength. Not the absence of difficulty, but the refusal to abandon principle because of it. Not the avoidance of discomfort, but the willingness to move through it when required. Not the pursuit of ease, but the commitment to integrity in every task. You do not need to wait for major challenges to practice this. Your entire day is filled with opportunities to choose virtue over comfort. Each one is a training ground for your character. Each one either strengthens or weakens your ability to govern yourself. If you commit to this discipline, you will begin to see your life differently, not as a sequence of tasks to minimize effort, but as a series of choices that shape who you are becoming. And in that recognition, you will understand that comfort is temporary, but character is cumulative. The mind that chooses virtue over comfort consistently becomes steady. It does not collapse under pressure because it has already trained itself to act correctly in easier moments. It does not depend on motivation because it depends on principle. It does not fluctuate with circumstance because it is anchored in reason. This is the path you must practice today, not later. In every task, ask what virtue requires, then act accordingly, regardless of comfort. In doing so, you reclaim authorship of your life from the quiet influence of ease and return it to disciplined reason. Number 7. Endure obstacles as lessons from reason, not insult. Obstacles do not appear in your life to insult you. They do not arrive to question your worth or undermine your progress. They arrive as conditions that reveal the current state of your mind, yet you often treat them as personal attacks. A delay feels like rejection. A failure feels like humiliation. A difficulty feels like injustice. In that interpretation, not in the obstacle itself, your suffering is created. You are not disturbed by what stands in your way. You are disturbed by the judgment you attach to it. The event is neutral until your mind assigns meaning to it. When you label an obstacle as unfair, unbearable, or insulting, you transform a simple condition into emotional conflict. The obstacle remains the same, but your internal response becomes unstable. Every time life resists your expectations, your mind immediately searches for someone or something to blame. You blame circumstances, people, timing, or even yourself in distorted ways that do not lead to clarity. But blame is not understanding. Blame is reaction without reason. It gives the mind the illusion of explanation while avoiding the responsibility of examination. If you observe your own reactions honestly, you will notice how quickly you interpret resistance as hostility. A problem appears and you feel personally targeted. A plan fails and you feel disrespected by reality. A goal is delayed and you feel life is working against you. These interpretations are not facts. They are emotional projections layered on top of neutral events. Obstacles are not designed to align with your preferences. They do not exist to confirm your expectations. They exist as part of the structure of life, where action meets resistance. Without resistance, there would be no measure of strength, no development of discipline, no opportunity to refine judgment. Yet the undisciplined mind treats resistance as violation instead of instruction. When you interpret obstacles as insults, you surrender your ability to respond clearly. Emotion takes the place of reason. Anger replaces understanding. Frustration replaces analysis. In that state, you do not solve problems. You multiply them through reactive thinking. The obstacle remains, and now your judgment becomes another obstacle layered on top of it. The disciplined mind does not personalize difficulty. It studies it. It asks what is actually happening without adding unnecessary meaning. It separates the event from interpretation. What occurred is one thing, what it means is another. Only one of these belongs to reality. The other belongs to your thinking. Confusing them leads to unnecessary suffering. You must learn to see obstacles as information rather than opposition. Each difficulty reveals something about your current methods, expectations, or preparation. If something does not work, it is not an insult to your ability. It is feedback about your approach. If a path is blocked, it is not rejection. It is redirection toward adjustment. If effort fails, it is not humiliation. It is instruction about refinement. Most people resist this perspective because it removes the comfort of emotional justification. It forces responsibility back onto perception. It removes the narrative that the world is unfair and replaces it with the clarity that judgment must be examined. This shift is uncomfortable because it eliminates excuses, but excuses have never created strength. When you accept obstacles as lessons rather than insults, your entire relationship with difficulty changes. You no longer waste energy defending your emotions. You redirect that energy into understanding what must be adjusted. This shift transforms suffering into analysis, not because pain disappears, but because interpretation becomes disciplined. Every obstacle you encounter contains two possible responses. One response is emotional interpretation that produces frustration, resentment, or withdrawal. The other response is rational interpretation that produces clarity, adaptation, and action. The obstacle itself does not determine which response you choose, your judgment does. And your judgment is the only part of this situation fully within your control. If you trace back many of your setbacks, you will find that the obstacle itself was rarely the true cause of failure. The breakdown often occurred in interpretation. Instead of asking what can be learned, the mind asked, why is this happening to me? Instead of asking, how can I respond, it asked, why is this unfair? These questions do not lead to solutions, they lead to emotional stagnation. You must interrupt this pattern by training yourself to pause before assigning meaning to difficulty. When an obstacle appears, do not immediately define it. Do not label it as good or bad. Begin by observing it as it is. Something is not working, something is delayed, something is resisting. That is all that is certain in the beginning. Everything beyond that is interpretation. From this neutral observation, reason can begin its work. What is under your control in this situation? What adjustments are possible? What response would strengthen your character rather than weaken it? These questions shift attention away from emotional reaction and toward practical understanding. This is where real progress begins. You may notice that obstacles often expose habits you were previously unaware of, weakness in preparation, gaps in discipline, assumptions that were never tested. In this sense, Obstacles are not interruptions to your path. They are part of your path. They reveal where refinement is needed more clearly than success ever could. Success can hide weakness. Difficulty exposes it. This is why adversity, when understood correctly, becomes valuable rather than hostile. It shows you where your thinking is not yet aligned with reality. But only a mind willing to learn can benefit from this exposure. A mind that interprets difficulty as insult closes itself off from insight. When you react emotionally to obstacles, you make them larger than they are. You add layers of meaning that increase resistance. What could have been a simple correction becomes a source of prolonged frustration. What could have been a small adjustment becomes a period of wasted energy. Emotional interpretation does not remove the obstacle, it amplifies its impact. To change this, you must practice immediate separation between event and judgment. Something happens, you observe it. Then you delay interpretation long enough for reason to respond. This delay is not hesitation, it is discipline. It prevents emotion from locking the mind into premature conclusions. Each morning you should prepare for the reality that obstacles will appear during the day, not as exceptions but as normal parts of action. This preparation removes surprise. When difficulty arrives, it is not treated as abnormal, it is treated as expected. This shift alone reduces emotional reaction significantly. During the day when obstacles arise, remind yourself that your role is not to demand that reality align with your expectations. Your role is to respond intelligently to what reality presents. Expectation without flexibility creates frustration. Reason with adaptation creates stability. You must also recognize that your past reactions to obstacles have shaped your present habits. If you repeatedly responded with frustration, your mind learnt to associate difficulty with emotional distress. If you repeatedly responded with calm analysis, your mind learnt to associate difficulty with clarity. These patterns are not fixed. They are trained responses that can be reshaped through repetition. There is a quiet strength that develops when you stop interpreting obstacles personally. You no longer feel attacked by life. You no longer collapse under resistance. You no longer waste time asking why this is happening to you. Instead, you begin asking what this requires of you. That question alone transforms your position from victim of circumstance to participant in rational response. Obstacles will continue to appear regardless of your preparation. What changes is whether they destabilize your mind or refine it. A disciplined mind does not avoid difficulty, it uses difficulty as material for development. It does not demand a life without resistance. It learns to move through resistance with clarity. If you continue this practice, you will notice that your emotional volatility decreases over time. Not because life becomes easier, but because your interpretation becomes more precise. You stop adding unnecessary meaning to events. You stop inflating difficulty into personal insult. You begin to see events more clearly as conditions requiring response. In this clarity, action becomes more effective. Decisions become less reactive. Energy is no longer wasted on emotional interpretation. It is directed toward practical adjustment. This is how obstacles become lessons, not through words or theory, but through disciplined perception. At the core of this practice is a simple recognition. Reality does not owe you ease. It presents conditions. Your mind determines response. When you stop demanding that obstacles disappear and begin training yourself to respond to them rationally, you reclaim control over your inner state. Each obstacle becomes a moment of choice, whether to interpret it emotionally or examine it rationally, whether to see it as insult or instruction, whether to react or to respond. In every case, the obstacle remains the same. Only your judgment changes, and in that judgment lies your true freedom. Number 8. Release outcomes and measure success by character. You keep exhausting your mind by chasing outcomes that were never fully under your control. You plan, You predict, you expect, and then you suffer when reality does not align with the story you built in your head. But the source of your suffering is not reality itself. It is your attachment to a result that does not belong to you. You act as if success, approval, timing, and external results are extensions of your will, when in truth they are not. Every time you tie your peace to an outcome, you hand over your inner stability to forces that do not answer to you. You become dependent on variables that shift without warning. One moment you feel confident because things seem to be going your way, and the next moment you collapse internally because something outside your control has changed. This instability is not caused by events. It is caused by misplaced expectation. You must see clearly that your responsibility ends at your effort, your judgment, and your intention. Everything beyond that point belongs to the world. Outcomes are shaped by countless factors beyond your reach. Other people's decisions, timing, chance, environment, and uncertainty all play roles you cannot govern. Yet you continue to behave as if control extends further than it does. This illusion creates unnecessary frustration. When you measure success by outcomes, you judge yourself based on forces you do not control. This creates a life where even disciplined effort can feel like failure if the result does not match expectation. You may act correctly, think clearly, and behave with integrity, and still feel disappointment simply because the final result did not align with your desire. This is not rational judgment, it is emotional dependence on external validation. The disciplined mind separates effort from outcome completely. It evaluates what is within control and what is not, then assigns value only to what can be governed. Your character, your choices, your reasoning, and your actions belong to you. The result of those actions does not fully belong to you. When you confuse the two, you suffer twice. Once from uncertainty and once from misplaced evaluation. You have already experienced how fragile peace becomes when it depends on results. A single setback can erase days of effort from your emotional state. A single rejection can overshadow consistent discipline. A single delay can distort your perception of progress. This happens because your measurement system is external. You are using outcomes as the foundation of self-worth instead of using character. Character is the only domain where you have complete authority. It is formed in how you choose when no one is watching. It is revealed in how you respond when things do not go as planned. It is expressed in whether you remain honest under pressure or compromise for convenience. It is shaped by whether you act according to reason or according to impulse. These are fully within your control at every moment. When you shift your focus from outcome to character, your entire experience of action changes. You no longer act with hidden desperation for results. You act with clarity because the value of the action is already contained within the action itself. Effort becomes complete in itself rather than a means to emotional validation. This removes a major source of anxiety from your life. Most people unknowingly live as if outcomes define their worth. They feel valuable when things go well and inadequate when things go poorly. This creates emotional instability because external conditions are constantly changing. A life built on this foundation will always be vulnerable, no matter how successful it appears from the outside. You must train yourself to recognize the moment when your mind shifts from effort to outcome fixation. It happens when you start worrying about results during action. It happens when you begin imagining future judgment while still in the process of doing your work. It happens when your attention moves from present responsibility to future evaluation. This shift weakens performance and increases anxiety simultaneously. To correct this, you must anchor your attention in what you are actually responsible for in the present moment. If you are working, your responsibility is to work with discipline. If you are speaking, your responsibility is to speak with clarity and honesty. If you are making a decision, your responsibility is to apply reason without distortion. In each case, the focus remains on action, not outcome. Each morning, you should set your intention not for results, but for conduct. Decide in advance how you will act regardless of what happens externally. Decide that your measure of success for the day will be whether you remained aligned with reason. This reframes your entire day away from uncertainty and toward internal discipline. Throughout the day, observe how often your mind drifts toward outcome thinking. Notice how quickly it begins calculating approval, success, or failure in external terms. Each time you notice this, gently return attention to your role in the present moment, not the imagined future version of events, but the actual action you are currently performing. You must also learn to distinguish between evaluation and attachment. Evaluation is useful when it informs adjustment. Attachment becomes harmful when it determines emotional state. After action is completed, reflection on outcomes is appropriate for learning. During action, fixation on outcomes disrupts clarity. The timing of attention determines whether thinking is constructive or destabilizing. When you release attachment to outcomes, you do not become indifferent. You become precise. You act with full effort without emotional dependence on results. You engage fully in the task without fragmenting attention between action and imagined judgment. This creates a form of inner stability that is not easily disrupted by external events. You will notice that when you stop measuring success purely by outcomes, your relationship with failure changes. Failure becomes informational rather than personal. It becomes feedback about method rather than judgment about worth. This shift allows continuous improvement without emotional collapse. You can adjust without self-attack, and you can learn without discouragement. Your past suffering likely contains many moments where effort was present but peace was absent because outcomes were uncertain or unfavorable. This reveals the cost of outcome-based thinking. It removes presence from action and replaces it with anticipation or regret. Neither of these states strengthens performance. Both distract from what is actually within your control. The Stoic approach removes this distraction by narrowing focus to internal governance. You do not control whether the outcome is favorable. You control whether your action is rational. You do not control how others respond. You control whether your conduct remains aligned with principle. You do not control external success. You control whether your effort reflects discipline. Over time, this shift creates consistency in how you experience life. Success does not inflate your identity, and failure does not collapse it. Both become external events that do not define your internal state. What remains stable is your commitment to acting with reason regardless of result. This stability is what most people search for in external achievement but never find there. They believe that once they reach a certain level of success, peace will follow. But peace does not come from results. It comes from correct alignment between thought and action. Without that alignment, even success becomes unstable because it is still tied to external validation. You must begin to see each day as a practice in correct action rather than a pursuit of guaranteed outcomes. This removes pressure that comes from imagined expectations and replaces it with clarity of present responsibility. You act fully, but you no longer depend emotionally on what follows. When you release outcomes, you do not lose ambition. You refine it. Ambition becomes focused on the quality of your effort rather than the unpredictability of results. You aim to act correctly, not to control what cannot be controlled. This distinction protects your mind from unnecessary disturbance. There will still be uncertainty in your life. There will still be unpredictability in results, but these will no longer define your inner state. What defines your inner state is whether you maintained discipline in your choices, whether you acted with integrity, whether you applied reason without distortion. These are the only measures that remain fully yours. When you consistently measure success by character, your life becomes internally coherent. You no longer shift identity based on external fluctuation. You become someone who can act with effort without anxiety and reflect without self-judgment. This is the foundation of inner freedom. In every action today, remind yourself that the outcome is not the measure of your worth. Your conduct is. Focus your attention where your control is absolute. Act with clarity. Release what follows. And return always to the discipline of reason as the only stable guide in a world of uncertain results. Number 9. Practice steady action when praise and blame arrive. The moment praise reaches you, your mind changes shape. The moment blame arrives, it changes again. You may not notice it happening, but your inner stability shifts depending on the words of others. Approval lifts you, criticism lowers you, and in both cases, you are no longer steady. You are reacting, not governing. This is how external voices quietly begin to steer an internal life that should belong only to reason. You have mistaken the reactions of others for measurements of your worth. Praise feels like confirmation that you are correct. Blame feels like evidence that you are failing. But neither of these contains truth about your character. They only contain the perspective of someone else filtered through their own understanding, emotion, and limitation. If you allow these voices to define your direction, you will never remain steady for long. Look closely at how praise affects your behavior. It tempts you toward complacency. It creates attachment to image. It pulls your attention toward maintaining approval rather than maintaining discipline. You begin to perform for recognition instead of acting from principle. This weakens your internal structure because your motivation shifts from doing what is right to being seen as right. Now look at how blame affects you. It creates defensiveness. It disturbs your clarity. It pulls you into emotional reaction instead of rational evaluation. You begin to justify yourself rather than examine yourself. You begin to resist feedback even when it may contain useful correction. In both praise and blame, your attention moves outward and away from your own judgment. A disciplined mind does not depend on external evaluation to maintain stability. It remains anchored in its own reasoning, regardless of how others respond. This does not mean ignoring feedback. It means not being governed by it. Feedback is information, not identity. Praise is information, not validation. Blame is information, not destruction. Only your interpretation turns them into emotional events. When you depend on praise, you lose independence of thought. When you fear blame, you lose clarity of action. Both create imbalance because both shift authority away from reason and toward external opinion. This is how many people lose consistency in their behavior. They adjust themselves not according to principle, but according to audience reaction. You must begin to see that steady action is only possible when your mind remains unaffected by external verbal pressure. Action guided by reason must continue whether others approve or disapprove. If your behavior changes based on who is watching or what is said, then your principle is not yet stable. It is conditional. Each day presents small opportunities to practice this steadiness. A compliment may arrive unexpectedly. A criticism may be directed at you. A judgment may be spoken about your work, your decisions, or your character. In each case, your task is not to absorb these reactions as truth, but to observe them without losing internal balance. Before reacting to praise, pause and examine what it is actually pointing to. Is it acknowledging effort, or is it inflating identity? Does it contribute to improvement, or does it encourage attachment to image? Most praise does not require response. It only requires awareness. If you allow it to shape your self-perception, you become dependent on continued approval. Before reacting to blame, Pause and examine whether it contains useful information. Not all criticism is correct, but some of it may reveal blind spots in your thinking or action. The Stoic mind does not reject all blame, nor does it accept it blindly. It evaluates it with calm reasoning, separating useful correction from emotional projection. You must train yourself to remain unchanged internally while responding appropriately externally. This is the essence of steady action. It is not emotional indifference, it is emotional independence. You can acknowledge praise without inflation and acknowledge blame without collapse. In both cases, your internal direction remains guided by reason rather than reaction. Most instability in life comes from shifting identity based on external response. One moment you feel confident because someone approved of your actions. Another moment you feel uncertain because someone disapproved. This constant fluctuation reveals that your sense of self is not anchored in your own judgment. It is anchored in external feedback loops that you cannot control. To correct this, you must return authority to your own reasoning. Ask yourself what you believe is right before hearing what others say. After hearing them, evaluate their words through reason rather than emotion. This restores internal order because your foundation is no longer built on changing opinions. When praise arrives, do not rush to accept it as confirmation of superiority. When blame arrives, do not rush to accept it as confirmation of failure. Both responses are emotional shortcuts that bypass reflection. Instead, treat both as external signals that may or may not align with truth. Your responsibility is to examine, not to absorb. You will notice that steady action becomes easier when you stop interpreting external reactions as personal judgments. A compliment becomes less intoxicating, a criticism becomes less disturbing. Both lose their emotional dominance because neither is allowed to define your state of mind. This creates a quieter internal space where reason can operate without interruption. Each morning, prepare yourself for both approval and disapproval, not because they are guaranteed, but because they are inevitable in any life involving action. Decide in advance that neither will determine your direction. This preparation strengthens your ability to remain consistent when external reactions occur. Throughout the day, observe how often your behavior subtly shifts in response to imagined or actual judgment. You may find yourself speaking differently when you expect approval. You may hesitate when you anticipate criticism. These subtle adjustments reveal how deeply external evaluation influences your actions, even when you are not fully aware of it. To counter this, return repeatedly to your own principle. Ask whether your current action aligns with reason or with expectation of reaction. If it aligns with reason, continue regardless of how it may be received. If it aligns only with approval seeking or avoidance of blame, adjust it until it reflects internal judgment rather than external influence. Steady action is built through repetition in small moments. It is not a single decision to ignore all praise or blame. It is a continuous practice of not letting either one redirect your conduct. Over time, this creates a stable pattern where your actions remain consistent regardless of external environment. You must also recognize that reliance on praise creates fragility. If approval becomes necessary for motivation, then absence of approval creates paralysis. If blame becomes intolerable, then any disagreement creates instability. A mind structured this way cannot maintain long-term discipline because it depends on conditions it does not control. The disciplined mind removes this dependency entirely. It acts from internal reasoning, not external feedback. It evaluates input without surrendering control. It listens without becoming dependent. It reflects without becoming destabilized. This is how steadiness is preserved even in environments of constant judgment. When you practice this consistently, something fundamental shifts. External voices begin to lose their emotional authority over you. You still hear them, but they no longer dictate your state. You respond to them rather than being shaped by them. This is not withdrawal from society. It is independence within it. Your actions become more reliable because they are no longer influenced by fluctuating approval. Your decisions become clearer because they are not distorted by fear of criticism. Your presence becomes more stable because it is not dependent on external validation. You begin to operate from a center that does not move with opinion. This is the meaning of steady action, not resistance to feedback, but freedom from dependence on it. Not rejection of others, but refusal to be governed by their reactions. Not silence in the face of praise or blame, but internal stability while engaging with both. If you apply this discipline today, you will begin to notice that your choices become less reactive and more deliberate. You will no longer rush toward approval or retreat from criticism. You will act from reason and remain steady regardless of response. In that steadiness, your mind becomes your own again, no longer shaped by the noise of external judgment. Number 10. Advance with calm because the present is enough. You are not struggling because the present is insufficient. You are struggling because your mind refuses to meet the present as it is. Instead, it reaches forward into imagined futures and backward into unresolved pasts, and in doing so, it abandons the only place where action is actually possible. This is where your suffering begins, not in the moment you are living, but in the resistance you build against it. You tell yourself that you need better conditions before you can move with calm. More clarity, more time, more certainty, more motivation. But this demand for ideal conditions is itself what keeps you unstable. You are postponing peace as if it depends on external arrangement. Yet the only place calm can exist is in your current attention. If it is not here, it is nowhere. The present moment is not a problem to escape. It is the only point where your mind can act with reason. Everything you are trying to control exists outside this moment. Everything you are trying to fix already happened or has not yet arrived. But your life is not lived in those places. It is lived in what you are thinking, choosing, and doing right now. When you lose calm, you are not reacting to reality itself. You are reacting to your interpretation of what is missing from reality. You believe something essential is absent, and that belief creates tension. But often what feels absent is not needed for action. It is only needed for comfort. And comfort is not the foundation of disciplined living. You must see clearly how your mind constructs unnecessary urgency. It tells you that you are behind. It tells you that you are not enough yet. It tells you that something must be added before you can proceed correctly. This mental narrative creates pressure that does not come from the present situation, but from imagined standards imposed on it. Advance with calm means refusing to let imagined deficiency dictate present action. It means recognizing that what is required for right conduct is already available in this moment. Reason is available. Attention is available. Choice is available. These are sufficient for disciplined action. Everything else is additional, not essential. Your mind often treats the present as incomplete, as if it is waiting for something to arrive before it becomes usable. This perception creates restlessness. You begin to rush through moments instead of inhabiting them. You treat current tasks as obstacles to future relief rather than opportunities for present clarity. This is how life becomes fragmented. When you are not grounded in the present, every task feels heavier than it is. You are not only doing the task itself, you are also carrying anticipation of future outcomes, regret from past mistakes, and anxiety about evaluation. None of these belong to the task, yet you carry them into it. This is why calm disappears under pressure. The disciplined mind removes this unnecessary burden. It returns attention to what is actually happening now, not what could happen, not what should have happened, but what is currently within reach of reasoned action. In that return, pressure reduces because imagined layers are removed from experience. You must understand that calm is not the absence of difficulty. Calm is the absence of resistance to what is already here. Difficulty may remain, but inner conflict decreases when you stop arguing with reality. Much of your stress is not created by events, but by refusal to accept that events are already unfolding without your permission. Each morning, you should train yourself to begin from the present rather than from expectation. Before thinking about the entire day, focus on the first action. Before evaluating future outcomes, engage with current responsibility. This prevents your mind from scattering into imagined timelines that have not yet arrived. Throughout the day, notice how quickly your attention moves away from what you are doing. The mind prefers simulation over presence. It creates mental projections of success, failure, approval, or delay. These projections pull energy away from immediate action. Calm is restored when attention is repeatedly brought back to what is directly in front of you. You are not required to solve your entire life at once. You are only required to act correctly in the part of life that is currently accessible. When you expand concern beyond the present moment, you exceed the limits of your control. That excess creates anxiety. When you return to the present, control and action align again. Advance with calm also means accepting that progress does not require emotional intensity. You do not need urgency to act effectively. You do not need stress to move forward. You do not need pressure to perform necessary tasks. These states often weaken clarity rather than strengthen it. Calm action is more precise than reactive action. You may have learned to associate urgency with importance, but importance does not require agitation. A task can be significant and still approached with steadiness. In fact, steadiness improves execution because it preserves judgment. When the mind is calm, it sees more clearly what is required. When it is agitated, it reacts instead of assessing. The present moment is sufficient because it contains all that is needed for correct choice. You do not need to predict every outcome before acting. You do not need certainty about every consequence. You only need clarity about the next rational step. That step is always available if you are willing to see it without distraction. Most of your exhaustion comes from carrying multiple layers of time in your mind simultaneously. You are here physically but scattered mentally across what was and what might be. This fragmentation drains attention and weakens action. Calm is restored when you reduce your focus to what is immediately within your control. You must also recognize how often dissatisfaction arises not from actual deficiency, but from comparison. You compare the present moment to an imagined version of how it should be. That comparison creates tension that does not reflect reality. It reflects expectation. And expectation is not a reliable measure of truth. When you remove comparison, the present becomes clearer. It is no longer judged against fantasy conditions. It is seen as a situation requiring response. This shift transforms experience from emotional evaluation to practical engagement. The mind becomes less reactive and more functional. Advance with calm is not passive acceptance of everything. It is active engagement without inner disturbance. You still act, you still choose, you still improve, but you do so without allowing imagined future conditions to disrupt present clarity. Action remains strong, but inattention is reduced. If you observe carefully, you will notice that many moments of overwhelm come from thinking too far ahead. You begin the day, but your mind tries to carry the entire outcome of the day at once. This creates unnecessary weight. Calm returns when you release that weight and focus only on what is currently required. You cannot act in the future. You cannot correct the past. You can only govern your judgment now. When this becomes your anchor, urgency loses its authority. You no longer feel pressured by timelines that exist only in thought. You operate from present capacity rather than imagined demand. Each task you face today contains everything necessary for its completion within reasoned action. Nothing external needs to be added to your mind before you begin. Clarity is not found later. It is available now if you remove distraction. When you practice this consistently, you begin to notice a change in how you move through life. Actions become smoother, decisions become clearer. Emotional resistance decreases, not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer resisting the only moment you can actually live in. Calm does not slow progress. It removes distortion. And when distortion is removed, action becomes more accurate. You waste less energy fighting imagined problems and more energy addressing real ones. This is how steady advancement occurs without inner conflict. In every moment today, remind yourself that the present is not missing anything required for correct action. It is already complete in its demand for rational response. When you accept this fully, you stop chasing conditions and begin engaging reality as it is. And in that engagement, calm becomes not something you achieve later, but something you practice now.